And we are live. Doing it live. Alright, let's go see Jason Lindgren.
What he did was he started writing articles. He himself was writing them, and said when his name on them, he changed his name and letters around or something like that, just to keep pushing this out and keep the top going about whatever it was. In this case, it was the ballet. He also had one of the ballet dancers do a picture with a snake, a harmless snake, I think it was a boa. And oh my God, the attention in early Edwardian times. While Bernays was wrapping up his work with ballet in 1917, he was presented with another European artistic sensation to introduce to America. Enrico Caruso, the greatest tenor of his time, and one of the music world's greatest characters. Plugging Caruso meant following what was becoming a familiar pattern. So this is kind of like Justin Bieber, I guess, at the time. First came the press releases, then the visits to editors and publishers. He also coined phrases aimed at capturing public attention, dubbing Caruso the man with the organ line voice. What distinguished this assignment from earlier ones was the amount of times that Bernays spent observing the artist up close, staying in the same hotels and remaining on call 24 hours a day during a swing through Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, and Toledo. So basically he was with this dude, he was his manager, like what you would say a manager the way you look at it today. Taking care of a spoiled rock star. That's literally what he did. And of course, he was well compensated. He was already making a lot of money this early on, and he was very young. This guy in his early 20s. He says, in 1915 or thereabouts, I became a member, a one-third owner partner of the Metropolitan Musical Bureau, which had been established with a sanction of the Metropolitan Opera Company. My title was Publicity Manager. Caruso was one of 4 clients, and when he sang, I occasionally went on the road with him. This is a picture taken in Toledo, just about when we were preparing for World War I. We were greeted in Toledo by members of our armed forces, the infantry, and to my surprise, when we took the picture, we found a soldier who looked like Caruso standing right in front of the car, and Caruso's greeting him from the window of the automobile we were traveling in. Caruso sang next morning at the Shriners Temple, and of course, he took advantage. I said, oh, you got a guy who looks just like him. Let's take a picture and put that in the papers. He knew what he was doing. The rise of Hollywood was in symbiotic relation, to the rising trade of public relations, as will probably surprise no one. Edward Bernays was said to find the business of star making to be too heavy-handed. He did some work with Fox to promote the first fabricated star actress, Theda Bara, for the film Cleopatra that was released in 1917. Bernays devised slogans such as the high cost of kissing the modern Cleopatra is cheap compared with the price Caesar paid. He's so cute and clever, isn't he? Bernays tried to appeal to the general public, of course, but also high school principals as well, to attend screenings of the film by stressing its educational qualities, and also milliners and dressmakers by providing fashion inspiration. So again, targeting every single thing he could to market the product, in this case, this actress. As a side note, in stark contrast to the absolutely insane and over-the-top agenda pushing that I'm sure every single one of you here knows is going on today, this is Samuel Goldwyn. And he was said to be so attuned to public opinion that he used to sit in the movie theaters of things released under his film company with his back to the screen watching the audience reactions. He once stated, if the audience don't like a picture, they have a good reason. The public is never wrong. I don't go for all this thing that when I have a failure, it is because the audience doesn't have the test or education or isn't sensitive enough. The public pays the money, it wants to be entertained, that's all I know. Now, can anybody tell me how the absolute opposite is going on today with all of this social justice warrior nightmare crap where they're taking every intellectual property and shoving propaganda down your throat? Back then, they actually wanted to make money. That's why all these films are failing, because most people are not screwed up in the head and want all that crazy shit going on. In 1917, at the beginning of World War I, or the Great War as they called it at the time, April 13th, 1917, a week after Congress declared war, President Woodrow Wilson issued an executive order creating a new federal agency that would put the government in the business of actively shaping press coverage. Does this sound familiar? The new agency was called the Committee on Public Information, or the CPI, which would take on the task of explaining to millions of young men who were now being drafted into military service and to the millions of other Americans who had so recently supported American neutrality, why they should now support war. And here's why this was huge at the time. America was a very different place back then. They didn't go policing the entire world. Back then, people were very, hey, it's about the United States and nothing else, let Europe fight their wars. They decided against that for whatever reasons. There's lots of things we can talk about there, which would be like 6 other presentations. But he assisted in selling it to the public, and of course, he did. They did, I guess I should say. Funny enough, Edward Bernays wanted to serve his country during this time of war, and he launched his campaign to enlist on April 6, 1917, the very day that America declared war on Germany. To make that part quick, he was flat-footed and nearsighted. He was kind of a little guy too, and he had what we would call an F rating today. So instead, he went to work on the propaganda side of things. During the war, Edward Bernays pulled off a society-changing stunt that still has daily repercussions in the world today. Every male in this room, how do you feel about wearing a wristwatch? Does it bother you? Is it cool? Is it okay? No? Nobody likes it? Well, it used to be a thing before, but back in the early 20th century, men used pocket watches, and only pocket watches, and only women wore wristwatches. Pocket watches were thought to be more precise, and certainly more of a device for a gentleman. So what he did was, he convinced the soldiers to start wearing, because he was hired by this company, by the way, of course it was going in his pocket, for the military people to start wearing wristwatches that glowed in the dark, so that they didn't have to light a match to look at their pocket watches during wartime, and to get shot at, they needed to see the time. That's how he sold that one. That was one of his earliest society-changing stunts that we still see today. You wear an Apple Watch? There you go. Next came the Paris Peace Conference, formally opening on January 18th, 1919. And of course, he had a role there, taking part as a member of a 16-person CPI press team. This time, however, the reviews he received were less glowing. Before the team set sail, Bernays put out a press release announcing the mission, and the New York World ran a story saying the announced object of the expedition is to interpret the work of the peace conference by keeping up worldwide propaganda to disseminate American accomplishments and ideals. This one didn't settle with the public as well for some reason, but there were a lot of other people, and he wasn't a very high ranking at the time. Remember, he was still in his early 20s, so he wasn't looked at as like a classy gentleman or something. There's a picture from it. Bernays' experience in Paris may have left him disillusioned by his government's failure to grasp the power of publicity, but it did reinforce his belief in his new vocation and how it could mold the public mind. This is where he really gets started. The mass mind, as it had been known at the time, he had an opportunity to test those tenets even before he got back to the United States. At one of many cocktail parties he attended in Paris after the breakup of the press mission, he met, can I say that word name? Hassan Kendry, an aide to Arabia's Emir Faisal, who fought alongside the fabled lords of Arabia in the war against the Turks. So, the Arabs wanted better relations with the United States. He got on board, sweet-talked everybody, and of course, successful again. Bernays later described a realization that his work for the CPI could also be used in peacetime, and this is where he changed propaganda, quote-unquote, to public relations, but it's the same thing. There was one basic lesson I learned in the CPI, that efforts comparable to those applied by the CPI to affect the attitudes of the enemy, of neutrals, and people of this country could be applied with equal facility to peacetime pursuits. And that's exactly what he did. The first client Bernays worked with, after he was officially a public relations guy, was the country of Lithuania, which had declared its independence in February 1918. They were attempting to win recognition from the United States. He got the job, and he did exactly what he did with everything else. He got it in the papers, he got people talking about Lithuanian colors, Lithuanian food, their culture, and everything. All of a sudden, everybody wanted to know about what the hell's up with Lithuania? What's Lithuania? Another success. Still in 1919, Bernays' office assisted the American Civil Liberties Union, Best Foods Company, to launch a new salad oil, and the Federation for the Support of Jewish Philanthropies as they were conducting a large fundraising drive, and the book publishing firm, Bonnie and Liverite, which he would continue to have a relationship with for many years. Bank off that, that's for publisher. According to Bernays' memoirs, Liver Wright singled out 5 titles for him to initially promote. So this is how he got Uncle Sigmund's work into America, by palling up with a publisher in America. Bernays was hired in 1920 by the NAACP to handle public relations for their conference being held that year, which eventually took place in Atlanta, Georgia. The decision to hold it in Atlanta was considered startling. Bernays, of course, knew this provocative move would gain the attention of the northern media and would serve as a platform to discuss. So this is when the NAACP was first being launched. He thought it would be clever to have it in the South. The North would talk about it. It got in all the papers because controversy, and boom, another win for Bernays. However, it's important to note here, as we move through the years to 1922, just how important and huge a contribution that Doris Fleischmann made to the work of Edward Bernays. To cut this short, that's who he met, they fell in love, they got married, and she was also incredibly intelligent and worked on everything with him. This is around their wedding time. One of the clients that he had by then was the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, which, if anybody knows, was extremely expensive, so he had a good wedding. Early on in her partnership and marriage to Edward, Doris began publishing Contact, a periodical for the firm Edward L. Bernays, Counsel on Public Relations. It was published for 10 years and was regularly sent to over 15,000 people 4 times a year. Contact was able to get the word out about the ever-growing concept of public relations, delivering the ideas in an informative, conservative, and effective fashion. This is only a small amount of the writing that Doris accomplished in her life, as she contributed many speeches and campaigns to everything that Edward did. So Edward's already really confident by 1923, and he publishes his first book, which I keep meaning to finish reading. I've read some of it, Crystallizing Public Opinion, in which he set down the principles that corporations and governments have used to influence public attitudes ever since. He actually pretty much said how he does it, which is great, but you might not be as good and clever as him or have his context. It's something he had obviously been building up for several years at this point. But he does explain how he does it, and you could do that too, hypothetically. This is another good one he did. In 1923, Bernays was hired by the Procter & Gamble Company, a relationship that would last for 30 plus years, to promote Ivory soap. This is one of his more famous campaigns he would go on to be known for. Bernays did a study that found that people were most likely to choose a white, unscented soap, of which Ivory was the only product on the market. He promoted Ivory in multiple ways, including holding a soap yacht race in Central Park, and encouraging citizens to do their civic duty by washing their town statues and municipal buildings with Ivory soap. He then turned to children, always target the children, and decided he needed to make kids, the enemy of soap, to love Ivory soap. He offered the National Soap Sculpture Competition in white soap to schools, with the winning sculptures being sent to exhibitions in New York as well as to museums around the country. The contest became so popular that it was entered into the curriculum of many school districts and was held for a quarter of a century afterwards. So literally, he figured out, kids hated soap, nah, I'm gonna figure out a way to make them love soap because these guys hired me. And that's exactly what he did. In the 1920s, the Flapper Girl look, with what was called the bob haircut, was quite the rage. One of the celebrity icons of the look was Irene Castle, a dancer and idol who got the bob haircut. Much like how things can happen today, millions of women followed suit, flooding the beauty parlors to copy the short hairstyle. But there were hair makers losing money now because everybody was cutting their hair off. What did he do? This one wasn't quite as successful because, as I'm sure a lot of people know, that was the look for just about the entirety of the 20s and even in the 30s. He did help with the promotion of it, but he couldn't get all the women to stop cutting all their hair off, so only like a 50% success there. At one point in time, the premier silk textile manufacturer in North America was the Cheney Brothers Company of Manchester, Connecticut. By the second decade of the 20th century, the Cheneys begrudgingly accepted the need to become more fashion conscious regarding the design of their silks. So what he did was to get Paris talking about his silks and get their color schemes and all that. Again, he tied it to something bigger. This company blew up crazy, made a ton of money, made him a ton of money, another success. When Paris hosted the International Exposition of Modern Decorative and Industrial Arts in 1925, Bernays was there, ensuring American representation. The exposition lasted 17 weeks, with publicity lasting much longer. He pushed so much hard with the press for this stuff that this lasted for weeks and weeks and weeks when it was supposed to be just a single off event. He was really good already by 1925. On Friday, October 17, 1924, President Calvin Coolidge held a White House breakfast with a group of people, a breakfast that had been arranged by Edward Bernays. As Bernays stated in 1961, the objective was to counteract the perception of Coolidge as cold and taciturn. How can Coolidge's warmth and human sympathy be empathized? A striking idea occurred to me, that is, that we would take a group of well-known actors and actresses to the White House for breakfast. Oh, mixing entertainment with politics already, are we? Literally what he did is he got actors, actresses, stars, whatever, to have breakfast, take their pictures with President Coolidge, who was kind of like a wet rag, just boring as hell, total stone. And the joke was, the president nearly laughed at the breakfast. Also in the mid-1920s, the Peachnut Packing Company saw its revenue from bacon sales declining, and the company turned to Edward Bernays for help. To sell more bacon, Bernays decided to create an emotional appeal for a heartier breakfast that included, of course, bacon. At this point in time, Americans ate a light, simple breakfast, usually consisting of a toast or a roll, juice, and coffee. Bernays went and asked over 4,500 physicians whether they thought a light or a hearty breakfast was healthiest. Well, if a doctor says it's got to be true, right? What happened? The physicians overwhelmingly chose the idea of a hearty breakfast. Bernays' idea of a hearty breakfast included bacon and eggs. Yes, this is why bacon and eggs is eaten by Americans everywhere. So this definition is what he used when he released the findings of his study. Sales of bacon then began to increase, and bacon and eggs is now considered a normal, all-American hearty breakfast. Thank you, Edward. Many people do love bacon, I can't say that. In 1927, Edward Bernays worked briefly for Lindgren Myers, the makers of Chesterfield cigarettes. He pulled a stunt against the competing brand, Lucky Strike, which involved mocking the endorsements of opera singers who said Lucky Strike cigarettes were kind to your voice. George Washington Hill, who was the head of the American Tobacco Company, who made Lucky Strike cigarettes, promptly hired Bernays away from them, and oh my, the things they did together. In 1928, Bernays released his second book, Propaganda, which incorporated the literature from social science and psychological manipulation into an examination of the techniques of public communication. This book was partially written in response to his earlier work from 1923, Crystallizing Public Opinion, and of course, the next to a good job explaining things, and by this time, he really understood the psychology of how to manipulate you. In 1928, Bernays was hired by William Haley, whose family owned a cigar company called La Felina, and who had recently bought a controlling interest in CBS to sponsor their cigar brand. Haley wanted Bernays to polish the new networks they mentioned at this time. Everything was radio, and the whole 24-hour news cycle had obviously started yet. Together, they modified a concept called option time, in which CBS paid affiliate stations $50 per hour for an option and a portion of their time. The network would provide programs to the affiliates and would sell ad space or sponsorships to other companies. So with this model, what he did was, because they had the money to play with a little bit, they were able to get other stations to play what they wanted and therefore dominated the market. This is how big business really started getting its foothold in a lot of the media companies. Cigarette companies were wanting to expand their sales, desiring to target women as well as men in the late 1920s. In 1928, George Washington Hill, the aforementioned president of the American Tobacco Company, realized the potential market that could be found in women and said, it will be like opening a gold mine right in our front yard. Some women were already smoking but were seen as smoking incorrectly. In 1919, a hotel manager said that women don't really know what to do with smoke, neither do they know how to put their cigarettes properly, actually they make a mess of the whole performance. So Edward Bernays wanted to change that. Tobacco companies needed to make sure that women would not be ridiculed for lighting up in public, and Philip Morris sponsored a lecture series that taught women the art of smoking. To expand the number of women smokers, Hill decided to hire Edward Bernays to do this job, and he decided to attempt to eliminate the social taboo against women smoking in public. He gained advice from psychoanalyst A.A. Brill, who stated that it was normal for women to smoke because all of oral fixation said, today the emancipation of women has suppressed many of their feminine desires. More women now do the same work as men do. Many women bear no children. The those who do bear have fewer children. Feminine traits are masked. Cigarettes, which are equated with men, became torches of freedom. Torches of freedom. In 1929, Bernays decided to pay women to smoke their torches of freedom, image-making lucky strikes as they walked into the Easter Sunday parade in New York. This took place on March 31st, 1929. This was a shock, because until that time, women were only permitted to smoke in certain places, such as in the privacy of their own homes. And he had as many press as he could get there, had a bunch of photos taken, it got everywhere, and from that point on, Lucky Strike cigarettes made more money. And there's a shot of it that was in all the New York papers, especially because that's where he was. In October of 1929, Bernays was involved in promoting Light's Golden Jubilee. The event, which spanned across several major cities in the United States, was to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Edison's invention of light bulb. So, once again, he got all the big wigs together, rah-rahed it, and Ray Edison, who gives a shit about Tesla, right? Thanks. Aaron, how am I doing on time? Am I doing the best as I can? You good? He tried to help Herbert Hoover, who lost badly to Franklin Delano Roosevelt because of the Great Depression going on. That was one he didn't win. In 1932, the Ladies' Home Journal ran an extensive campaign that was orchestrated by Bernays. The object was to persuade American women to end the Great Depression through consumer purchasing, meaning go out and buy things. How many people remember post 9/11 George W. Bush saying, go to the mall and shop? He didn't think of that. Bernays did. It didn't work as intended, but feminists will examine the event and see how things are trying to be manipulated from that point of view. But it worked well enough. People went out and bought things. Before Bernays was hired by the manufacturer of Dixie cups, a disposal drinking vessel, other places had what was known as a tin dipper, meaning a communal drinking vessel. This can be, of course, unsanitary at times, and when Bernays was hired in the 1930s to promote Dixie cups, this was the very angle he went at. Once again, striking at the emotional side of things. You'll get the germs. Only Dixie cups were sanitary. He linked imagery of an overflowing cup with subliminal messages of vaginas and venereal disease. And another successful campaign was had. He used fear just like they do today, that time. With the repeal of prohibition, if anybody doesn't know, alcohol was illegal for a time in the early 20th century. I'd love to see how that would work today. A new client for Bernays had a serious issue. American brewers had a product with a very negative image, meaning beer. During Prohibition, the only thing breweries could make was soda bottle. So, years of speakeasies, gang wars, and bathtub beer had left. Beer is a drink with a terrible image. It may have been legal once more, but no one wanted to be seen drinking it, and certainly not buying it. Many localities actually voted to still stay dry in their towns, which is funny. Brewers wanted to make sure that the public never banned alcohol, or at least beer, ever again. Bernays took a poll of leading physicians, asking them one question. Here we go again, bring in the experts. Cult of the white lab coat. If you were to have an alcoholic drink, what was preferable? A strong drink, such as whiskey or beer, a beverage in moderation. That was what he wanted. Something that said, I am not a gangster or a criminal. So he released the report, beer was to be rebranded. Under Bernays' direction, brewers sponsored the development of a test that police could use to measure the alcohol level in a driver's blood. They encouraged shutting down places that served underage drinkers, ran advertisements emphasizing moderation, opposition to hard liquor, and even described beer drinking as a vaccination against intemperance. Yeah, he's the one responsible for the breathalyzer thing. That's the more mechanized version of it, but he came up with the concept all the way back then, and they implemented it. After this, that is more than a success. That was a massive success. He launched a letter-writing campaign to get state legislatures to permit the sale of beer in grocery stores. Within 6 months, he had 20 states going, okay, we'll do it. He was pretty good at his job, wasn't he? All right, going through the 1930s, Bernays once again helped Lucky Strike cigarettes in a significant way. It seemed that many women didn't care for the green packaging of Lucky Strike cigarettes, and the manufacturer concluded that changing the color was too expensive. So Bernays got on the job. He attempted to convince women that Lucky Strike's forest green pack was the most fashionable of colors. Bernays had letters written to interior and fashion designers, department stores, and prominent women of society to push green as the new hot color for the season. Balls, gallery exhibitions, and window displays all featured green after Bernays got through with them in his normally effective manner. The centerpiece of his efforts was the Green Ball, a social event at the Wall of Astoria, a prestigious hotel, hosted by Narcissa Cox Vanderlip, who was a bigwig at the time. The pretext for the ball and some named underwriters, the proceeds would go to charity, so he did it all in the pretext of, we're helping people. So what did he do? He couldn't get the people to change to the company, so he couldn't get the company to change the people, so he got the people to change the company. That's brilliant in my opinion. Edward Bernays was brought on to direct publicity for the 1939 New York City World's Fair that was held at Flushing Meadows, Corona Park, Queens, New York, which he branded as Democracy. It was the second most expensive American World's Fair of all time, only exceeded by St. Louis's Louisiana Purchase Exposition of 1904. Many countries around the world participated in it, and over 44 million people attended its exhibits in 2 seasons. It was the first exposition to be based on the future, with an opening slogan of Dawn of a New Day. Anybody hear that one before? And it allowed visitors to take a look at the world of tomorrow. The organizers turned the park into a veritable Disneyland for corporations, demonstrating wondrous new technologies such as television. David Sarnoff, the president of RCA and a strong advocate of television, chose to introduce the concept to the public at the RCA Pavilion. As a reflection of the wide range of technological innovation operating at the fair, Franklin Delano Roosevelt's televised speech, along with other parts of the opening ceremony and other events at the fair, getting everybody to go, what the hell was that? I want it. And they got it. Approximately 1,000 people are supposed to have viewed President Roosevelt's telecast on about 200 television sets scattered throughout the New York metropolitan area. To convince skeptical fair patrons that the television sets were not a trick of some sort, one set was said to have been made with a transparent case so that the internal components could be seen. I think that's pretty clever. In 1940, Bernays advised William O'Dwyer and his candidacy for mayor of New York City on how to appear in front of different demographics. Bernays had his staff fan out into each of the 5 boroughs of New York, surveying thousands of potential voters, asking them about their political attitudes. He took all of this information, broke it down into ethnic and religious groups, and conducted a psychological survey. So he ended up with this massive information that, of course, today would be very computerized, and he figured out the ways to target each of the districts individually. That guy didn't win, but he did go on to win later, but it was close. In the early 1940s and lasting for numerous years, Bernays began working as Chiquita's public relations counsel, creating a campaign that stated that bananas were very good for you as they cured celiac disease and were good for the national defense, as the company had lent its ships to the U.S. military in World War II. As the Guatemalan government became concerned with the needs of its impoverished majority, Bernays began a PR blitz to spin the left-leaning government as covertly communist. He urged Chiquita to find a top Latin American politician to condemn Guatemala's actions and hire a top attorney to outline the reasons for outlawing the land reforms. Bernays planted stories in major newspapers and magazines on the growing influence of Guatemala's communists. Bernays got the New York Times to assign reporters who were sympathetic to his cause and obtained coverage in liberal journals like The Nation. So basically, he literally went out of his way to skew an entire nation's political government to help his client. That's pretty messed up. In 1952, Bernays was journalists in the region at Chiquita's expense to gather information, but with everything the press saw were carefully staged and regulated by the Post. So he set up the stage for them to come and see. Bernays was at his finest when articles supporting Chiquita's claims were printed. Bernays would offer to help distribute reprints of the article to top government officials and other writers, and to help get a congressperson to reprint the article in the congressional record, as recommended by the members of the United States Congress. Bernays also set up a number of intelligence agents to undertake a private intelligence survey of the political and ecological situation in Guatemala, and fed reports from those phony agents to the press as warnings from an authoritative source or an unranked intelligence official. Now that's what I call propaganda. Nazi Minister of Propaganda Joseph Goebbels was said to have read Bernays' writings and found them fascinating. He is also said to have used techniques devised by Bernays, who was Jewish, to propagate anti-Semitic propaganda. Learning of this, Bernays was shocked when he left his thoughts on the matter his work would be used. Yes, literally, Hitler was on the cover of Time magazine in 1930. Something like that. Yep. In a letter to President Franklin D. Roosevelt, Supreme Court Justice Felix Frankfurter described Bernays and his associate, Ivy Lee, as professional poisoners of the public mind, exploiters of foolishness, fanaticism, and self-interest, warning the president against following Bernays to play a leadership role in World War II. Nevertheless, during the war, Bernays devised the United States Information Agency as well as the Army Navy. He was chairman of the National Advisory Committee of the Third U.S. War Loan, co-chairman of the Victory Book Campaign, and part of the New York State Defense Council. In 1947, Bernays published an essay called The Engineering of Consent. This would later on be used as the title of his book published in 1955, but he would actually only contribute one chapter, with the others being written by other propagandists. The idea of the engineering of consent was motivated by Sigmund Freud's idea that humans are irrational beings and are motivated primarily by inner desires that are unconscious. If one understood what those unconscious desires were, then they could be used to one's advantage to sell products and increase sales or influence a particular way of thinking, such as a political ideal. What do we see every single day, gentlemen? Get your COVID shot, wear your mask, social distance. It's the same crap being used over and over and over again, except now they've done it on a mass scale. Fluoride. That's his fault. You can get practically any ideas accepted. Bernays is quoted as saying, chuckling at the same time. My partner Pro likes to call him a proud pig because he laughs at how clever he was. If doctors are in favor, the public is willing to accept it because a doctor is an authority to most people, regardless of how much he knows or doesn't know. By the law of averages, you usually find an individual in any field who will be willing to accept new ideas, and new ideas that infiltrate the others who haven't accepted it. So, we all know that we have the cult of COVID and the high priest in the white lab coat, right? That's what he did here too. Alcoa, the aluminum company in America, had been a client of Bernays since the 1930s. Bernays was hired by Alcoa to present industrial-grade fluoride, a common byproduct and a regulated pollutant, officially produced by the manufacturer of big seller aluminum as a benefit to public health. So he had to convince people that a pollutant was good for your health. Bernays himself is quoted as saying he took the job because he was fascinated to see if he could convince an entire nation to vote against what it knew instinctively to be its own good health interest. He did it because he wanted to get away with it. And he did. The formula to make instant food by adding water to dry ingredients was developed during World War II to help cook or make foods faster and easier. Among these, the instant cake mix was one, and is considered one of the pioneering innovations of the food industry. However, it wasn't selling well. Women failed to respond to the new concept of instant cake mix, which puzzled the researchers behind the product. In the 1950s, Betty Crocker hired Bernays to help, and he found the answer. Psychologically speaking, it was guilt. Bernays realized that when the housewives just add water to the mix, they felt guilty in their subconscious because they were contributing so very little to it. Upon his suggestion, the recipe was changed to require eggs. It worked, and we still buy them every single frickin' day in every grocery store in the world. Make no doubt that Edward Bernays did more to influence society than we mentioned in this little presentation. As we often say on Approachable 7 Radio, who knows how much we actually skipped. After semi-retiring from his work in the 1960s and deciding to move from New York in 1963, Edward and Doris decided to look for a place to retire to. After researching several different cities, they decided on Cambridge, Massachusetts because of its cultural and educational possibilities with a tradition of intellectual stimulation and a feeling of Europe. Bernays did not stop working, of course. Various PR projects gained his attention, but Bernays' major effort during his final years was to professionalize the field that he created. Despite his best efforts, Bernays was never able to get public relations to be a licensed professional. That's actually something he was really hung up about. He really hated the fact that anybody could just say that they're a public relations person. Despite his best efforts, Bernays is often critical of those who seem to be his heirs. He told the New York Times in an interview conducted in honor of his 100th birthday that any dope, any nitwit, any idiot can call him or herself a public relations practitioner. However, he said he would be happy to be called the father of public relations when the field is taken seriously, like law or architecture. Doris passed away on July 10, 1980, 8 days before her 89th birthday. When Edward passed away on March 9, 1995, he was 103. He had still been working all along, meeting with his final client only 2 days before, as he was still in demand as a $1,000 per hour public relations counselor. That was in 1995, he was getting $1,000 an hour. I don't know what that would be today, but probably double. So as I said earlier, multiple times, how are these concepts being used today? I would suggest that scary numbers, as well as exaggeration, if not outright lies, are being used to push the notion that there is an out-of-control illness and is going to get you and your loved ones if you do not comply with each and every directive given to you by governmental bodies as well as non-governing bodies who many view as being incapable of doing wrong. Arming yourself with real information is the only way to combat this and help you to make the right decisions in your own life. No one but you has the right to decide what you do with your life. That's right. Thank you.
Jason Lindgren, everybody, give him a round of applause. Thank you, Jason. All right, everybody, we did run long today. Our schedule got kind of messed up because of our technical issues, so we are going to have Marty Leeds do his presentation tomorrow. Tomorrow morning, we have our screening of Flatlanders Episode 1. So if you guys want to watch the Flatlanders Episode 1, be here at 10 a.m. and we're going to play it on the big screen for everybody. And then after that, we were going to do the live Q&A, but I don't know, we may do Marty first and then the Q&A and then go on from there. Continue the schedule from there. But Marty will do his presentation tomorrow before lunch. Okay? And that's about it for today. If you're in the single mingle, I hear people asking about where's the singles party, you're at it. You're at the singles party, okay? If you have your lanyard, okay, and you're single, and you know how to look for other singles, that's the secret. It's the secret single mingle. It's a secret. So that's why you guys know how to find each other, and that's the secret mingle. While you're here.
No, that's not mine.
Can you have them? Cool. How you doing? I see you.
Yeah.
Right on.
I see you having
Hey. Yeah, hang on.
Alright, so that's it for day 1. We have lots of restaurants, lots of bars in downtown, walking distance. You guys can all hang out, enjoy each other's company, flat smack some of the locals. Alright? Fun.
Yeah, I might do some flat smacking. Yeah, I think I'm gonna end it. I need to change my battery, and I was hoping this stream would be good for just having Jason on here, just to keep everything organized. I'll definitely go live later. I need to change my batteries and everything, charge it up. Yeah, Amanda. Yeah, for sure. I'll probably get one tomorrow. I'm not sure if he's still doing it right now, but he said he'll be doing that tomorrow, so. Yep. We got Rose 777, Kelsey, Austin. All the cool people are here.
Going to put one wall there, but right now there's a wall.
Alright, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure you're subbed to critical_inception on Twitch. and D Live, so you get all my notifications because I won't always be on YouTube. A lot of stuff we can't say.
Yeah, it's